And thank you for joining this fourth and final webinar in our M&A webinar series. My name is Graeme Hartlen. I lead the strategy and operations practice and private equity practice at Burnie Group. And it's my pleasure to host today's webinar. Just before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items. So the session will be recorded and it will be sent out to all participants after the webinar. We are in listen-only mode during the presentation. If you do have questions, you can submit them through the chat function. And we will have, if there are questions, a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, would like to introduce our guest for today. So John and I go back 10 plus years, a former colleague of mine in the retail space, very talented and accomplished executive, has held several C-level positions within private equity portfolio companies. So John, welcome, and maybe you could just introduce yourself and give the audience a sense of your experience that you bring to the table.
Sure. Hi, everybody. John Bogert here. I'm currently on my fifth tour, as I call it, working for a private equity firm, because it is pretty intense during these periods, especially in the roll-up plays. I've done 3 roll-up plays so far, fair amount of M&A, probably closed 25 transactions in the last 10 years. So I have some experience with it and hoping to share some of the rules for success and some of the pitfalls, because, hey, we haven't gotten it all right. We've made lots of mistakes, but that's where you learn.
Great, John. Well, thanks again for taking the time. And I know that you're pretty new in a new role, so very busy days for you. And we really appreciate you joining us today for the webinar. Obviously, as you mentioned, you've got pretty extensive experience with roll-ups. Just starting off, across the different industries that you've operated in, what are some of the key conditions for success in a roll-up? So what are the industry and company characteristics that align really well with this type of a strategy?
Well, so I've done roll-up plays in dental. I'm currently doing one in another healthcare space. For me, you just need a highly fragmented industry, right? Like in Canada in dental, there's 10,000 dentists, right? Which gives you a huge amount of opportunity. But it's nice to have varying sizes. You don't want all single players. It's nice to have some of those groups out there who have, maybe 5 or 10 or 20 retail units so that you don't have to buy them all one at a time. Mm-hmm. The way I think about it is there's roll-up plays with synergies and there's roll-up plays without synergies, and both are fine. Like in dental, it was actually negative synergies because we had to add finance resources at the corp level that weren't offsetting labor savings at the clinic level. So, but that's sort of a pure roll-up play where you're trying to buy them at one multiple and sell them ultimately at a different. The ones with synergies are also great, but you don't need synergies to do a roll-up play, I guess is my point, right? Although I think you would approach them a little bit differently.
Got it. And with you mentioned the different groups within the dental space. Was there sort of a target profile that was sort of really kind of the sweet spot where, the value proposition of being partially or fully acquired really resonated, and those were who you went after amongst the 10 or 15,000 dentists in Canada?
Yeah, well, it will vary by sort of roll-up play, but typically you want them to at least have $500,000 of EBITDA because of all the legal costs and machinations to get a deal closed. It's just not worth doing it if they're only earning $100,000 because you're probably going to spend $200,000 on deal closing costs, legal, accounting support, all that good stuff. It's also a lot about the person that you're buying, right? Somebody runs that business, and at least in dental, we wanted the dentist to stay around for 5 years. Mm-hmm. Although I've seen other places where it's more sort of entrepreneurs running smaller units where we were fine with 2 years because in the world of dentists, they would stick around forever. They just became corporate dentists. When you're buying entrepreneurs, my experience would say they're not going to last more than 2 to 3 years because they are not going to enjoy the corporate space, right? They've lived in a world where they get to make all the decisions, and corporate, just in my experience, it's rare that true entrepreneurs are happy in the corporate space. So again, you plan for that, right? You need them to stay for at least a couple of years. You never want to buy somebody who's handing you the keys and walking away, right? Yeah. That would be a general rule.
Got it. That's an interesting point you bring up around entrepreneurs, and I can understand they would be having built a practice. They'd be used to calling all the shots, and it would be a very different sort of world for them operating as part of a platform roll up. Any thoughts on sort of best practices? So in that 2 years that you mentioned when they're with you, on how to sort of navigate that dynamic and make sure that you're getting them on board in the most important areas so that you can operate effectively?
Yeah, so let me just talk about entrepreneurs first of all, right? So I mean, we bought a lot of guys who the whole idea of monthly financials was foreign to them. They're like, oh, at the end of the year, my accountant runs the numbers. I find out if I made money, right? And on a weekly basis, I just look at the bank account. If we've got cash, we must be doing okay.
Yeah.
Right. So the whole corporate reporting, business cases, approvals, all this stuff is foreign to them. And for me, it just recognizing it with them and talking to them openly, you know, over a coffee or a beer and saying, hey, I get this is hard for you. Right. Let's work together on this. Make sure that they feel like they're heard. And because I mean, their decision-making process is gut or experience, right? But not generally analytical. Right. And what I found is if they have some gut feelings around way to do things, run the numbers for them. Right. It might be a great gut decision or it might not. And you can show them why in our world, you're not going to do it that way. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. And so then when you are bringing them on board, you know, some of the best practices that we've observed through our work is, you know, making sure you have, you know, efficient and effective processes early on, and that you've defined and you're executing against a repeatable integration approach. And particularly in the early days, you know, thinking about some of the basic blocking and tackling that you want to get in place, you know, think about 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. What are some of those, you know, key elements of your integration playbook that you know, need to get in place by those important milestones?
So, great question on the 30, 60, 90. I actually think it starts at minus 30, right? So, and one of the key things we had for success was we used to close deals and then the staff found out on the day of close, and we realized that was a huge mistake. Now, if it's like a receptionist, do they need to know? No, but any sort of middle to senior management should know about the deal in advance. It shouldn't be a surprise to them because there's a risk of people exiting. Right, of saying, oh, I didn't want to work for you guys. And you need to know that as part of the deal, right? And so it's a little bit concerning when the owner says, I don't want you talking to any of my staff. You're going to need to partner with them. So you might as well start those conversations before the deal closes.
Yeah.
You know, clearly you need to have a list of everything you need to do, right? Everything from banking to financials to marketing to HR to policies to, you know, procurement. All those things need to be on the list. The priorities really day one were typically that first week was about just getting the employees comfortable. Sometimes you got them to sign a new employee contract, sometimes not, depends on the industry, right? But having all the receivables start coming into the new bank account, right? In the case of a dental, you had insurers who were depositing money and you need to make sure that's in the right bank account. Having the new Visa machine already on day one, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And you know, but there's some stuff that can wait, right? If they have a website, do you need to take it over day one? No, but you need to have a plan for when you're going to do it and realize when that's going to fit in.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is it's really important to make sure that you don't just come in and corporatize it, because there may be things you can learn from this business, right? There's always a nugget. Just because they're doing something differently doesn't mean they're doing it wrong. Right. Yeah. So you want to make sure you take the time to really learn how they're doing things so that you can, before you go and change it, that you've milked any new insights or ideas out of those businesses.
Yeah, that's a great insight, you know, in terms of keeping your eyes open and to new opportunities to improve the business overall. You and I have discussed in the past sort of the importance of understanding the operating model and the business cadence, as you described it, for businesses that you're acquiring. So understanding, you know, how decisions are made, how information flows, what processes they have in place. I wonder if you could share some of your experience there of really sort of, you know, putting your ear to the ground and understanding the cadence of the business that you're acquiring and how you can come up to speed on that and figure out the right ways to plug into it at the platform company.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I'll use, I was in snow removal for a while, and in snow removal across the country, we had very different approaches to how we paid and even approached staffing in the winter, right? And what we learned was that some of it was structural, and in that geography, that's how you had to pay people, but some of it was choice, right? And we learned that by really digging in, there was things to learn. Another example would be one of these companies that we owned had the systems in place so that as the crews came back after their day, the minute they hit the yard, they knew that they geo-fenced that they were back in the yard and they clocked them out. Yeah. Now, I could have just moved them to our new payroll system, but they would have lost that capability because we didn't do it everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not something that you necessarily want to have as a policy across the company, because it sort of depends on the culture. But that's just an example of, if we just rolled out Dayforce and said, you got to use it, they would have lost that capability. And for them, that was important that they had this. It wasn't just financial, it was cultural. Once you hit the yard, you're off the clock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so it's those types of things that you need to make sure that you're sensitive to as you're thinking. You don't want to just change it all. You want to understand why they do it that way. What's the rationale? What's the business sense? And then decide if you're going to corporatize it, I guess is the word. Right.
Yeah. That's a really interesting technology example there. And, technology is obviously an area that's important for any merger acquisition. And just thinking about a roll up where you're bringing on multiple acquisitions, we hear a lot about the challenge of technology integration, and particularly around business reporting. And obviously, your PE fund and management is going to want to have good visibility to results. You mentioned earlier in the conversation how how entrepreneurs operate isn't often on the monthly cadence that the fund would be used to. So, would be curious to hear how you've managed the business reporting from a technology standpoint, where you're bringing disparate systems together that don't all connect together, and how do you ensure that you get the right visibility in a way that's efficient?
Right. Good question. So I break that into two pieces: financial reporting, right, where, at least in my experience, they've all got to move to our single accounting system, where they can just be a division within a greater whole and it all gets added up quickly. So typically within about 6 months, you want them on your accounting system, right? And often these entrepreneurs are on QuickBooks, and QuickBooks is pretty cool, but it only has single division, single operating unit reporting capabilities, right? So on that one, I think you want to move it over. On the more operational IT, things that you use to manage the business, be it production, be it, labor intensity, on those ones I've been a little shyer to just go and change, because it's a huge effort and there's negative synergies as you're rolling it out. And typically what we've done is said, listen, if I can build a cloud-based system that will pull the data from the various systems and give me the dashboard I want, that's what I need. I need the dashboard of how we're doing. I don't need everybody using the same systems necessarily, right? And so it's a choice, right? And, obviously in dental, there was like 10 different clinic management systems, and changing them over was hugely painful. So we built a cloud-based system that pulled from all of them and gave us a single view, right? Whereas in snow removal, we had tools that the teams were using to manage productivity in the field. And our call that time was, everybody needs to be on the same system. So it varies based on the scenarios.
Sounds like a really good way to solve the challenge there in dental, though, to give you the information that you needed without sort of disrupting and taking on those negative synergies of updating systems across each of the practices.
Yeah.
How about from a governance standpoint? So assuming you have sort of good visibility to the data, as you scale, I could see, the first, practice 1 to 10 that you bring on, you can sort of wrap your head around how each of them are doing. But when you get sort of like 11 to 25 and 26 to 50, becomes more of a challenge to effectively govern the organization. Any best practices to share there? So as you're scaling, how to stay on top of governance and make sure that you're really understanding how the business is performing?
Yeah, so typically private equity is not going to want you to add new layers of management, right? So let's say you've got somebody who can manage 10 practices. And so I've got 10 people managing 50 practices. Sorry, I've got 50 practices. So I've got 5 managers, right? If I grow to 200 practices and I've got 20 managers, I almost need another layer to manage those managers. Right. But private equity is very reticent to go add new layers of management. And so you need to think creatively about how do you find a way to get the oversight and the management without adding all new layers of management.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Great.
I think what you want to do is you want to strain that puppy to the max and leave that problem for the next owner. Right?
Yeah. So on that topic of management, and maybe speaking within sort of without adding layers, but finding the right mix of talent. In our experience, the person who successfully launches and builds a company from the ground up isn't necessarily the same person that would be able to manage a larger organization. And obviously, at management, the platform company, you're going to need to have a skill set that can not only keep an eye on the day-to-day, but also manage the complexity of a scaling organization. Wondering if you could talk me through, how folks like you end up in the roles that you do, and what are some of the key capabilities and skills that you would want to look for at the platform company if you're embarking on a roll-up strategy?
So I got a couple of different questions in there, so I'm going to answer it a couple of different ways.
Yep.
One is, as you're growing and scaling, there's a tremendous need for mid-level or senior level management as you grow, right? And typically at all these companies, we very quickly got into, okay, what's our succession planning, right? Who can replace people? Who can grow into it? And we've often created hybrid roles where people, instead of managing one clinic, they manage 3. And that's a training ground for them to be able to manage 10 down the road, right?
Yeah.
So you're creating that pipeline of internal talent. The other thing I would say around as you're building talent or building your team is you need to really have good conversations with your PE partner about what's the end game. Are you building an M&A department to complete 10 deals and then get dissolved? Or are you selling the company with this M&A capability as part of what they can do? And those are 2 different strategies, and you're going to hire different types of people. If I'm trying to have an ever living M&A and integration team versus like a one-time deal, right? So you need to have those conversations with them around that for sure. Private equity, I always find them to be a bit of a conundrum because they want to hire people who know the industry super well, but yet their plan is to run the business differently than anybody else has run it. So why would you want people who've got all this industry experience if your model is to break the mold, right? And so I've managed to be successful in pitching, hey, I don't know your industry very well, but I know a lot of industries and I can bring different experiences that will help us find new ways to create value, right? Some PEs are open to that, which is why I'm employed, and other ones are less open to that. And so, it depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah. Very, very interesting dynamic there. And obviously, I think you mentioned this is your 5th sort of tour of duty in this type of role. Even the best plans, in any kind of merger acquisition, things go wrong, even with great planning. Wondering if you could share, one or more of the battle scars that you have from your experience. Like, what's one thing that what's one misstep that you've made in the past that you'll never make again as a result of, mistakes during the integration?
Well, I definitely the one about talking to the key staff before you close the deal, because I've had day one where you get 2 or 3 of the key people won't sign the contract and walk out the door, and then the whole reason for the transaction is off the table, right? We've had people on day one say, hey, I haven't given a raise in 10 years. I need this raise or else I won't resign. But I've absolutely had some failed transactions. And the one thing I would say is Q of E's done by these big accounting firms won't catch somebody who's doing fraud, right? If somebody's cooking their books, they can check to see that are the books being managed appropriately and are the accounting processes in place. But if somebody's literally cooking the books, my experience is they don't tend to find that. So you need to learn the business, understand what the weak points are, and in their financials test hypotheses around. You can't just take, and I won't say the name of it, this big accounting firm did a Q of E, so we're good. It doesn't work that way. You've got to take ownership for really understanding how the business ticks and what you really think it's making in terms of cash. Yeah,
got it. And then, we've talked about a lot of different topics today across, understanding the cadence of business, the, technology and reporting, importance of being there in advance of, bringing the right people in advance. If you were to sort of boil things down to what's the single most important must do that will define success for a roll up, what would that be? What's consistently worked for you?
Build good relationships with the people that you're buying, because ultimately anything tough or difficult that you have to make happen is going to happen through them, right? And even though corporate might own the business right now, people are going to look to these entrepreneurs for leadership, and you've got to have a good relationship with them, right?
Yeah.
If the relationship with the seller sours, the relationship with the entire acquisition will likely sour.
Got it. All boils down to relationships.
It's all about people, man.
Yeah. Well, John, this has been really, really insightful. Are there any topics that we haven't covered today that, just based on your, experience, your 5 tours of duty, that you think are relevant and important for, any PE funds out there or investors that are considering this type of a strategy?
Just be open and consistent in your communications, right? We're all in this together, the management and the PE firm, to create value on this mission, right? Yeah. And let's just be open and transparent in our conversations about what we're trying to do, right? And don't either management or PE hide things from each other, right? Yeah. Let's just all work on it together, I think would be one of my key lessons. Mm-hmm. And it starts with management being open to PE and being vulnerable sometimes when things aren't going badly, right? Yeah. When things are going badly, right? You've got to admit when you made mistakes, and all PE wants is to know what you're going to do to fix it. Yeah. Right? It's okay that stuff went wrong. Don't try and hide that. Tell them what you're going to do to fix it, and they'll be happy.
Yeah. Well, that's great insight. Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time today. Again, I know you're very busy in a new role. We really appreciate you spending the time with us. I certainly learned a lot from the conversation, and I'm sure that our attendees did as well. So with that, hope you have a great rest of your day, all of you, and rest of your week, and enjoy a safe and happy holiday weekend coming up. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye now.